Well, hello and welcome to the Cross to Bear podcast. I'm Phil Bear, your host, and today I have one of my favorite guests, and usually he goes by the Faithiest Atheist, and I have to apologize for my misspelling in the description. I spelled it the Faithiest Atheist, and I don't know what that means, but somebody can figure it out for me, and they can tell me what their interpretation of it is. So, without any more delay, let's bring Richard on. Hello, Richard. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you.
Is there anything special about today?
Today's my birthday.
Sweet. Well, I would sing you happy birthday, but I don't know if that might be a little bit embarrassing. So, but I've been a little bit confused because is that you?
Yeah, that's our house. But so my wife's a personal trainer, and she has people. We have a gym in our. We have a garage in our gym, and so my wife trains a lot of people in our gym.
You have a garage in your gym. Wow,
Yeah,
that's
garage.
interesting.
And our garage is 100% gym. There's no cars in our garage. It's all
Well, I've never.
one big. We should even do like a tour one day. I'll show you the. I'll show you the garage, and you can see all the workout stuff in there.
Yeah, I'd like to do that. I've never known anybody that had a garage in their gym. That's
What,
pretty interesting.
what were you about to ask a minute ago?
Well, I've seen you as the Faithiest Atheist, but lately I've seen a moniker of the fallen ape theist, the
Yes.
fallen ape who is a theist.
Yeah,
Is that what that
I,
means?
I had a lot of grief with Faithiest Atheists because I'm not the kind of atheist that says no gods exist. I'm like it could be a god exists. I just don't think that they do. So you could say maybe agnostic, and there's always that debate that philosophers have that atheists once originally meant no gods exist, and then in the last couple of decades, a second definition has emerged where you can say you lack a belief, which the dictionaries now say that too. So if you want to go that way, we're great. Um, but I was getting grief for that, and then someone shut down my page on Facebook, and they did this trick, which I guess it's a risk if you do it. It's a risk for you if you do it, but it works. You tell Facebook that it's impersonating another famous Facebook page, and then Facebook says, "Well, what page is he impersonating?" And you put the exact same link, and so the machine matches what you said was an impersonator with what you're claiming was impersonated, and if it's the exact same thing, it closes down the page. Um, what happens is that you need a person to undo that because the people don't care at Meta, and you have to find a person to go look it up to undo it, which I'm not inclined to do. I'm just not going to spend however long it takes to find a person. Um, but from what I hear from other people who've gone through this before, if a person finds out, they'll undo it, and then the person who did it to you, whatever person reported you for that, they could get in trouble. Maybe not even lose their page, but maybe like a little flag against them. But the bottom line is that if no person ever sees it, then the person who got trolled is just shut down. So when that happened, I decided to just rebrand, and I came up with another name, Fallen Atheist. And I also wanted to have fun with that too, because you could say atheist like atheist, except that I'm a primate. I'm saying that I'm a primate atheist. Or you could say that I'm an ape who's also a theist. Or you could say I'm an apatheist, and an apatheist is somebody who doesn't care whether God exists. And you could just say an apatheist who doesn't know how to spell. So there's just all kinds of ways you could go with that. So I enjoyed that, and my thing is I don't know if God exists, and it's not really important to me whether He does or not. That's not really my game. So I kind of appreciate this new name as well.
Well, you're in good company when you say I'll take the option that you can't spell. That's the one
Okay.
I'll choose
Okay.
because apparently I can't spell because I called this podcast the comparative explanatory power with the Fathiest Atheist,
That's right. That's right.
and I never realized it until just now. So I hope everybody can forgive me for my bad spelling. But
Right.
I've actually seen some pretty I don't know if I'll say humorous but I say that in a lighthearted way. I
Yeah.
see some pretty humorous typos in some of the titles of a lot of the YouTube videos that I see, and
Right.
a lot of the online debates. And one of them recently was God decrees everything, and that was the subject, and that was a debate. And in the word decrees, there was an apostrophe before the S.
Degrees. Yeah. Decrees. Yeah.
And
That's funny.
there's no apostrophe when apostrophe means possessive,
Possessive. Right.
and there's that's not a possessive word in the title. God decrees everything, question mark.
Right.
So I did a review of that debate, and I put a little X and I crossed out the apostrophe when I graded my little thumbnail for it.
Nice. I like
So
that. Sort of like a red pen logic would do.
yep, but I think everybody can forgive me for doing that because I do the same thing. You know, I mean, I make little spelling errors here and there. So I do that just kind of just to be a little bit lighthearted and just to be playful. I don't do
Right.
it to be mean or anything because if I did it in a mean way, then people could be really mean with me too because
Right.
I'm definitely guilty of it. The other thing I wanted to say real quick was that I said this last time when you and I were on a podcast, and you said, Phil, if you say that, you're going to lose subscribers, and but I don't care, and I want to say it again. I want to say it at the beginning of this conversation because I have to be humble. If I'm not humble, then I'm nothing. You know, it's just like the Apostle Paul said that if you don't have love, then you're nothing, and I kind of want to make a little bit of an extension to that and say if I'm not humble, I'm nothing. And so the thing that I want to get across and the thing that I try to get across on a regular basis is I could be mistaken about this stuff. So I'm a fallen ape too.
Right. That's
No.
that's another thing I think was we're all if we're all primates, then we all have some fallenness to us.
Yeah, and obviously I'm a Christian and Christianity believes that man is fallen, so we're imperfect and we're in an abnormal state. So I'm not perfect. I can be corrected. I spoke at a little church in Wheat Ridge, which is a suburb of Denver, on Monday evening, and I told them then when I gave my presentation, I said, I could be wrong about this stuff. I'm not perfect. I can be corrected. It's possible to correct Phil Bear, and I can be taught. I don't ever want to get to the point where I'm unteachable. Because I think, see, some of these personality traits or some of these habits that sometimes people can have if they're not careful, they can cause you to they can make it so that nobody wants to be around you. You know,
Right.
it's no fun being around the know-it-all, and it's no fun being around somebody who thinks they're always right or always has to be right. And so what I try to do is I just try to say I don't have to be right. I just have to be truthful. That's my goal and that's my objective. I want to be truthful. And if I'm going to be truthful, then I have to say that I could be corrected, because if I can't be corrected, what if I'm wrong? And if I can't be corrected, then I'm not going to be a truthful person. So that's something that I always want to stress and I always want to make clear. So, but I don't know if this applies to you. I think you're pretty much right about everything. I don't think I've ever heard you say anything false, and I don't think I've ever corrected you on anything. Have I?
Well, that's why I'm here. I'm here to correct you. That's my job.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that very much. So you can subscribe to my channel. I've got a little ticker there on how you can subscribe and how you can support my channel. I'd love it if people could support me and help me out. The expenses are increasing, so that's that on the screen. And then I also want to let everybody know that if they have questions in the live chat, they can just put a question colon and ask their question, and hopefully I will see it and we'll be able to respond to it and get to it. But I want
to add real quick that the guitar solo is worth the price of admission. So whatever people donate, the guitar solo right there at the beginning is worth it.
that's their reward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know who that guitar solo is. I don't know who the musician is on that. I
I thought it
just
was
kind of
you.
found it. It is. Yeah, I'm actually. I have a confession. I'm not only the guitar. I'm all of the instruments on that
It's,
song,
it's very well done.
and that's a thank you. I appreciate the compliment. It's very kind. I That's a composition called "Out of the Silent Planet." For those of whoever might be listening, where if they're not aware of this, I think I told you this,
I know this
but
series. I know the Ransom series.
yeah, so it's named after the first song, or the first song, the first book in the Ransom series by C.S. Lewis. So, and it's an old recording. It's been around for quite a while. So, anyway, thank you for the compliment. I appreciate it. I humbly accept it, and I humbly thank you. And I wanted to give you a little bit of an opportunity to just introduce yourself one more time. I know I do this all the time, and you're probably getting tired of it, but if anyone is watching and they don't know who you are, just give us a real brief introduction of who you are, what your background is, and what your gig in life is, and then we'll start in with our subject matter.
Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, I was the Faithiest Atheist, and that was kind of the name that got me to Facebook fame anyway. I wasn't on any other platform. Now that Facebook has freaked me out a little bit, I've moved over to Twitter. And then I have pages now on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram and Threads. And I'll send all those links. I meant to put them in chat before the show, but I'll send them to you after this.
Okay.
All those links are on there. And yeah, now the new brand is Fallen Atheist. At some point, I might revisit Facebook. But meanwhile, on Facebook, I'm just my usual Richard Suttles. In fact, now that I'm still doing debates, I'm still doing public speaking things. I don't know if you know Frank Turek's social media guy. His name is Jorge Gill. He was like, the thing is, people know your name. They know Richard Suttle, so it doesn't matter what people call you. Like my next two debates, I've got a debate coming up this weekend at a local church here in Phoenix, where I'm going to debate the Ratio Christi director of ASU at a local church. And then I'm actually debating Eric Hernandez. You're hearing it here first. This is the first YouTube show to formally announce Richard Suttles versus Eric Hernandez on the origin of morality. That's going to be in Fort Worth, Texas, and it's going to be at a restaurant called Tulips in Fort Worth, and it's going to be Sunday, October the 27th. So anybody who's in Texas, make your way to Fort Worth, get your tickets, and then it'll also, of course, it'll be streamed at some point, either then or soon after. But yeah, me versus Eric Hernandez on morality. So that's going to be a big event as well. So yeah, those two announcements are coming. Again, like I said before, I'm not a Christian, but if you're looking for me to defend atheism in the same way that Richard Dawkins or Aaron Ra does, you'll be disappointed because I don't go that route. And I suspect that's why I'm here now, because of our topic today is going to be a different way to describe how I see reality and how some atheists differ from that.
Yeah, and how we explain reality. That's really the crux of the matter today. So thank you for that, and I'll send you a sympathy card ahead of time because I know you're going to lose a debate with Eric Hernandez, and yeah,
he's the best. He is absolutely the best, and I've been friends with him for 3 years now, and we've talked personally over this for years, so we know each other's positions. That's going to be the best thing about this, is that we already know what each other's thinking. There's not going to be any surprises for us.
Yeah.
So they're going to get like a level 10 debate that couple of weeks from now, and he is the best of the best at the moral argument. So it's going to be quite a spectacle.
Yeah, he was on the Atheist and Christian Book Club a few months ago.
I called him. Remember, I'm the one that asked him that question.
That's right. Yeah. Maybe that's what sparked the debate.
Well, we've been planning this. We've just been waiting for the right venue. And
oh, okay.
The venue is called the Bible and Beer Consortium. They've been doing this for years. They used to have Aaron Ra on, for the same venue. They'd go to a restaurant and have a couple of hundred people show up. So those are the guys who are hosting it, and we've just been waiting for the right host with enough people and enough of a live stream audience to make it interesting.
Great. I wish I could be there, because I would love to sit in the audience and heckle.
Yeah.
That'd be great. Well, so the only other I'm kind of mixing my words around today. I don't know why. Maybe I'm losing my mind. Who knows? But somebody might say, you're just now losing your mind. I thought you lost your mind a long time ago. So, yeah. But in my book, Machines Don't Laugh,
which I have.
pointed out in the first chapter, I believe, that a lot of people are trying to get away with this alternate definition of atheism.
Oh, wait.
And
Go ahead. Before you say it, I just want to say it's too late, but go ahead.
it's too late.
Yeah. Once it's in the dictionary, it's already too late.
Oh, I know. Yeah, right. I know.
Yeah.
Well,
What you're
yeah.
about to say is correct. What you're about to say is correct, but it's like the word literally. Now it's in the dictionary that literally can also mean literally, not literally.
Uh-huh.
So once that happened, then anything goes at this point.
Yep. Yeah, and but I'm not really surprised by what shows up in the dictionary and what doesn't these days, because the dictionary is now just basically bending to the will of a lot of people in society that don't really have a lot of scholarly background and so on. So I think the dictionary has just become kind of a tool of people who want to be politically correct, and I think that's kind of a little bit of a tragedy. But what I pointed out was that if you define atheism as a lack of belief in God, then at that point atheism is indistinguishable from agnosticism, because agnosticism is also a lack of a belief in God. In fact, lack of a belief in God is really more of an official definition of agnosticism than it is atheism. So now our terminology is becoming useless more and more these days. And so I always point out that if you want to call yourself an atheist, then I think you should commit to the lack of the existence of God. I don't think you should just say, yeah, well, I just don't believe that God exists. I lack a belief. And part of my objection is about, what if I was in a debate with an atheist, and the debate was, does God exist? And what if I said in that debate, well, I never said that God exists. I just lack a belief that God does not exist. And if I do that, then I'll probably get criticized for that. And if I say that, then we can all go home, because there's nothing to debate. If I just say, well, I didn't say that God exists. I just lack a belief that God does not exist. And so you can't define an ideology or a worldview in a vacuum. You can't define it by what you deny. You have to define it by what you affirm. And I think a worldview needs to make a positive truth claim. And if it doesn't, then don't make that truth claim and don't wear that label. I think people really would be better off not wearing that label and not calling themselves atheists. So I don't know how you feel about that, because you still said Faithiest Atheist, and at least you didn't say Faithiest Agnostic, even though I think you're more of an agnostic than you are an atheist.
Sure. Yeah. The thing is that, I always stress right off the bat that that's not really my game anyway, so that I don't particularly care. But I always say, when I'm debating someone, I'll wait and see what they think. When like you said, there's now two different groups of people identifying as atheists. There's a lot of different people identifying as Christians too. I was engaging with a polytheist, and he was like, no, I'm a Christian. It's just that Christianity should be polytheism, and all the other Christianities have just messed it up. And he was getting all into it. He was getting into like Yahweh, and Yahweh was the son of another. And he had all this scripture, and he was like, this is the true Christianity. And I'm like, okay, man, that's how you take it. So, we'll talk like that's what's true for you. I know that sounds like, I'm saying subjective truth, but the thing is, there's nothing else to do. If you're with a guy who thinks that Christianity means polytheism, then talk about polytheism. There's no point in me trying to force him into saying there's one God if he literally thinks that there's multiple gods. So when I meet an opponent, I'm like, tell me what you believe, describe God the way you see God or gods, and we'll go from there. And I'll tell you how I see probably not gods.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've got a comment that says it depends on how God is defined. If you define go is the universe, then I believe in God. And I think that was supposed to be, if you define God as the universe. And I all I'm doing is making fun of somebody's spelling when I make the same kinds of mistakes, so we can all laugh at each other and in this. But yeah, it is true, because there really are only four categories of worldviews. There's atheism, agnosticism, pantheism, and theism. And theism is a broad term that can encompass deism, and it can encompass polytheism. But if God is the universe, then that's in the category of pantheism. And so pantheists do believe in something that they call God, but what they call God is just the universe. The universe is indistinguishable from God, and God is indistinguishable from the universe. So yeah, it can be a little bit of a challenge to try to define these things and to try to arrive at the best and the clearest definition. But I do believe that it's something that we should strive for. Because if we don't, sometimes we can end up in confusion. We can end up talking past each other, and that's not only no fun, but it's unproductive, and we're not getting anywhere. So, but what I was wondering though is maybe you should call yourself the believiest non-believer.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
The non-believer that believes the most.
Yeah, I was thinking. The thing with fallen atheists that I like is that the fallenness is important, because if you're religious, then you might think that there's a sinful aspect to nature or to us that makes us fallen. And then if you're a non-believer, you might think that we're the product of eons of hit and miss. So we're not going to quite live up to perfection, because we've got so much wrong with our past that we can't quite get there. So I like how fallen kind of applies no matter what you believe. No matter what you believe, you could agree that we're not as good as we want to be. So I like that. And then the atheist is because I think we're all primates. And then the spelling of atheist and all those different ways to take it, I enjoyed that.
Yeah. Well, it also kind of creates a little kind of a sense of unity, really, because you have something in common with believers, because believers believe that we're fallen, and then you can talk about being fallen in a different sense, but there may be an intersect between the two, and it can actually foster a good conversation, I think. So
that's my goal. That's my main goal.
Right, and I appreciate that, by the way. So let me introduce our topic a little bit. And this topic is something that I'm pretty sure it'll be easy to exhaust this topic just within a matter of probably 30 minutes, I'm guessing. So,
okay.
I'm being facetious.
Well, actually, we'll probably agree pretty quickly, but our talking about it could last longer.
Right. Yeah, and so here's what sparked the debate. The last time that we had an atheist and Christian book club, there was a participant who goes by the moniker the Godless Granny, and her name is Kelly. I don't know her last name, but it's her name is Kelly. She's a delight. She's an absolute delight. I consider her humble, and I consider her open-minded. But she asks tough questions, and I appreciate that she asks tough questions. And she asks those questions in a sincere way. Right. Because sometimes people will ask questions just in order to trap you. And I don't think that's very productive, and I don't think it's very genuine. I think it's better to ask questions in order to foster a great conversation, foster understanding. And if that ends up inspiring someone to rethink some of the things they believe, then I think that's a wonderful outcome. And so that's what questions should do, as far as I'm concerned. And so she's a delightful lady, and she's never has a mean spirit, and she said something during that book club session that really kind of drove the clockwork in my head. And I immediately, as soon as I started thinking about this, I thought, I want to have a conversation with Richard about this. And I'd like to have a conversation with Kelly as well.
That would be
But
great. I haven't had a show with her yet, and I'd love to, because I've seen several of her shows, and she and I just haven't talked yet.
yeah, well, and she and I haven't been on each other's shows either, and I think we should. I think it'd be productive and fun, and I would enjoy it very much. I'd be honored if I could be on her show. So she said, well, you Christians, you just assume that God exists. And the implication that kind of was embedded in that comment was that we don't have any rational basis for that assumption, that we're just simply assuming it because we were talking about some atheist approach to explaining the nature of reality by appealing to the universe as a brute fact. And it's a brute fact that doesn't need any explanation. It's just a brute fact. And whenever I hear that, the first thing I think is, what if a Christian or a theist said, okay, then God is a brute fact. Are you willing to accept God as a brute fact?
Right.
And my guess is that they would say, oh, absolutely not. There's no way I'm going to accept God as a brute fact and just assume. And that's what Kelly meant when she said, well, you guys just assume that God exists. And so, and the other thing that I thought about whenever I hear that, and when I heard it, and as I've thought about it since then, is that most atheists that I know and most atheists that I've read are strongly committed to science. And they are usually rational realists when it comes to the philosophy of science. Because there's a range of philosophies of science. There's non-rational non-realism, and rational non-realism, and non-rational realism, and rational realism, and all these. There's various categories in the philosophy of science. And most of the atheists that I've ever read or heard about and heard discuss these things are rational realists. They believe that the real world exists, and that man can discover the nature of the real world and can explain what happens in the real world on the basis of empirical evidence and identifying natural law in order to explain them, and so on. And when I heard the atheist say, the universe is just a brute fact that doesn't need any explanation, what I thought to myself, and I don't want to be unkind or anything like that, but what I thought to myself was, that is the most anti-science statement that I've ever heard in my life. How can you think about a subject matter, and how can a scientist say that subject matter, that phenomenon, or whatever it is we're studying at the moment, doesn't need any explanation? That would be like saying lightning doesn't need an explanation. It's just a brute fact. It just happens. It just occurs. It doesn't have a cause. And we don't want to talk about the cause of lightning because we're just not interested in the cause of lightning. And if somebody said we're not interested in the cause of lightning, most scientists would kind of scratch their heads and say, well, how is that in keeping with the spirit of scientific investigation and scientific inquiry? And so I think of the same thing when I think about someone who says the universe is just a brute fact and it doesn't need any explanation. I'm like, yes, it does. Yes, it does. It needs an explanation. And because if you are going to tell me that I need to provide some kind of explanatory power for the existence of God, you're going to expect me to provide an explanation, and you're going to expect me to provide some kind of rational support for my belief in God, and yet you're going to abandon. I'm not talking about you personally, Richard. I'm saying, but in the dialogue, I'm saying so. But you're going to abandon. You're going to abandon the whole scientific paradigm by saying that I just believe that this thing is out there, and I believe that it appeared, and I believe it exists, but it doesn't need any explanation. So tell me what your thoughts are on that, because I really want to zero in on that and try to carry the conversation forward in a way that's meaningful and doesn't just accept platitudes. And I know that you're not one to accept platitudes. I don't think you are. So
Well, let's try. Let's try that. See if I like it. I think here's what I try to do whenever I hear something from an atheist. I remember what it was like growing up as a Christian and hearing my pastor or youth group or someone or some adult telling me something, and I have questions, and then they say, no, that's not right. You can't do that. What's wrong? The fact that you asked me a question means you're doing something wrong. I remember what that feels like. So I try to think, what would I be like if I was raised in atheist church, and the atheist pastor said,
I think we just lost Richard for a second.
I'm backstage.
There we are.
Okay, yeah, put me backstage for some reason.
No, I didn't, but it did for some reason. Yeah, my hands were off of the controls, so maybe it was my mind, my will.
It was Satan.
Satan?
Yeah, because Satan doesn't want me to say what I'm about to say now. But like, let's say I'm an atheist church and the atheist preacher says the universe is a brute fact, and he's like, no more questions. And if you ask a question, there's something wrong with you. And if I ask a question, everybody laughs and goes, haha, it's a brute fact. You're so silly. Don't you understand it's a brute fact? If I couldn't ask the question, I would still keep thinking to myself, okay, then why are there brute facts? Why do brute facts exist? So it wouldn't get out of it for someone to say, well, it's a brute fact. And then I would say, okay, why are there brute facts? So I can understand why somebody would still have questions. So for me, it wouldn't go away to say the universe is just a brute fact. I would still want to know why. Why is there a universe?
Yeah, and by the way, when you said it's Satan, I wanted to, I just thought of something that I wanted to kind of, a little fun fact to share with you. Dana Carvey follows me on Twitter.
Oh, great. The Satan guy.
Could it be Satan? Yeah, he was the church lady in Saturday Night Live. Yeah. And I've always loved Dana Carvey, and I don't know why, but just out of the blue, I saw a list of my followers on Twitter, and it was Dana Carvey was one of them. I thought, no, that can't be the Dana Carvey. And so I clicked on the username, and it really is Dana Carvey. So Dana Carvey really does follow me on Twitter. Wow. And I think that's hilarious. I have no idea. And I think what happened was that it was back in the early days of Twitter where they suggested that if you want followers, then follow other people. Because if you follow people, then they will follow you back. And so that's a good way to... So just go out and make random followers. And I think I'm just one of the random people that he started following on Twitter like a long time ago. I don't know how long ago, but he's been a follower of mine for a long time. That's awesome. And I actually direct messaged him one time and wanted to know if he wanted to be on a guest on my podcast, and I never got a reply, but maybe someday I will. I don't know, because he lost his son a little over a year ago, and
I think I heard that on the news.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to talk to him about that, and my purpose would not be to hammer him on, oh, you should be a Christian. My purpose would be to just hear from the heart of Dana Carvey over the loss of his son, and to stand by him and grieve with him, because that's not something that you get over in a year. Right. So that's, and maybe he's not ready to talk about it publicly. I don't know, but my channel's not exactly public. I don't have a whole lot of followers, and maybe that's another reason why, But anyway, so yeah, and so there are two kinds of Christians in this world. There's the kind of Christian who says, don't question anything. Don't question belief in God. Don't question whether the Bible is true or false. Just believe everything by blind faith. And if you question something, then, like you said, you're doing something wrong. And I think that is one of the most unhealthy attitudes that one can possibly have. But not only that, but it's also one of the most unbiblical attitudes that anyone can ever have. Because the Bible is not about blind faith. The Bible is about test everything to see whether or not it's true. The Bible is about, we're giving you eyewitness testimony. We're not asking you to believe something by blind faith. We're saying we've got evidence, and you can go and check out the evidence for yourself. And that's what happened in the first century when Jesus rose from the dead. The apostles didn't say, hey, Jesus rose from the dead, but don't go to the grave and don't go looking for his body. Just accept my word for it. Just take my word for it. And if you don't take my word for it, then you're a reprobate. That's not what they said. What they said was, Jesus rose from the dead. We are eyewitnesses of this, and you can go check out our story. And if our story wasn't reliable, we wouldn't be able to proclaim it publicly because we'd be laughed at. So I would always discourage anyone who is religious from criticizing someone for doubting and for asking questions. And I think the best example of this is Jesus and doubting Thomas. When Thomas said, unless I feel his wounds, unless I see him, I'm not going to believe. And then Jesus appeared to doubting Thomas, and Jesus didn't criticize him for doubting. And a lot of people don't realize that. Jesus didn't berate him for being a doubter. He actually rewarded his doubt by showing him the evidence. And so that's really the paradigm that the Bible is all about. And so the people who are criticizing someone and saying that they're doing something wrong, if they ask questions, then they're not doing anybody any favors, and they're not doing themselves any favors, and they're not doing God any favors at that point. So I appreciate you sharing that. But here's my question. Do you think that theism or atheism, which of those do you think has the greater explanatory power for explaining the existence of the universe, explaining the nature of man, and explaining natural law, and explaining everything that we see, explaining morality and so on? Do you think that one of them has the greater explanatory power, or do you think they are equally powerful in their explanatory nature, or do you think they are equally not powerful in their explanatory nature?
Yeah, I have a ton of answers for this because it's not as simple as that. I would say, first of all, there's something weird about humanity where just like you Christians say that you can easily see someone else's sin and then not see your own sin. It's exactly like that for how we do evidence analysis. And it's for like our epistemology, our logic, our metaphysics, our morality. All of that is affected by our circumstances. So the way someone explains something on one side of the world might be completely different than the way somebody else explains something and what makes sense to them. And like a really good example of this is that there's a lot of cultures that believe in spirits. And that goes all the way down to their metaphysics. If you explain like cells moving around as spirits, they're their brute fact. They're like, okay, that's my brute fact. The spirits moving things around, I got you. And they don't even have to be theists. They can just be like, oh yeah, spirits, or there's something, could be the cosmos or whatever. So everything is affected by our experiences. So when you say what's the best way to explain something, what's the explanatory power, that in itself is a loaded term, because what's explanatory for one person is going to be meaningless for somebody else. That doesn't mean that there is no truth or that there are no true statements about the external world. In fact,
there's nothing objective.
Right. In fact, one objective truth is that we are extremely influenced by our experiences, all the way down to metaphysics, logic, morality, intellectualism, all of that, explanations, all of that is affected by our experiences. So when I answer for me, what works for me, I know that there's some people who are going to say, no, that's wrong and you're stupid. But I'm always fascinated just that anything exists. Just the fact that there's something, even though there's a lot of nothing. When I say nothingness, I mean like a lot of space and planets, but where nothing happens, and a lot of empty space where nothing happens. And then there's a lot of time on Earth when the life forms were minuscule and nothing was really happening. And then there was a lot of times where everything died, almost literally, almost everything died, and it was just horrible. So it's hard for me to be inspired by that, but it's also just amazing that anything is here at all. So I can say for existence, I'm, I'm more inclined to see why people would say theism. I can say like, okay, I see what you mean. There's got to be some reason why things are like this, and so you're thinking that there's something that makes things like that, and that's why there's things like this. And I'm like, that's hard to argue with. I can see why people would do that.
Well, and I wanted to say real quickly that Richard, I believe that you're wrong about a few things, but I don't believe you're stupid. I just want to go on record saying that
Uh,
because you're one of the most intelligent people I know, and I have an enormous amount of respect for you, and so I respect you because of your intelligence, but I also respect you because of your attitude. You have a humble attitude, and you're willing to admit that you don't have all the answers, that atheism doesn't have all the answers.
right.
And as a Christian, I would even say Christianity doesn't have all the answers. Because
You heard it here first.
yeah, if I'm a Christian, I have to recognize that God has given me and has given mankind a wealth of knowledge about himself and about the nature of the universe and about the nature of man. So he has told us a lot, and he has told us that what we need to know, but he hasn't told us everything there is to know. So that means that since God hasn't given us exhaustive information, he hasn't revealed an exhaustive set of knowledge to mankind, then I almost by default have to say that as a Christian, and Christianity itself doesn't have all the answers, because there's some things that we just simply don't know. And if Christianity is true, and when we die we go to heaven, then maybe when we're in heaven we will know pretty much everything, or we'll at least know a lot of the things that we didn't know on earth. So yeah, but I like the fact that you don't think you have all the answers, and I like the fact that you're willing to be challenged. And so that makes a lot of sense to me. But did you have something more to say about that, though? I didn't want to cut you off. You know.
Yes, and especially since I'm going to argue with Eric Hernandez about morality here in a week and a half, uh, I want to say that I don't think theism makes sense with morality. I do think that everybody, everybody, even people who say that there's no such thing as moral realism, even they believe in moral realism. When you keep picking at them, you're going to find something that they believe is morally true. Um,
Right. A la
so I,
C.S. Lewis.
right. So I think that that's something about human nature, but I don't think that that means there's objective morality. I just think that everybody thinks so, and the ones who don't think so, it's just easier to pick on them because I'll find something. Um, but I don't think that means there is one. I think a lot of our lives are an illusion, and so that might be one of them. And my big thing about objective morality is that even if there is objective morality, we're all going to do what we want anyway. So ISIS could be right. ISIS could say this is the objective morality. We have it all figured out. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to join ISIS even if it's the objective morality. So we're all going to do what we're going to do, even if there is objective morality. It doesn't make any pragmatic difference on our planet. We're going to keep doing what we want. So that makes me wonder if there really is a deity who said, okay, guys, here's your objective moral rules, and these are going to be written on all of your hearts, and you all kind of know it. I don't see why there would be so much fracturing and disagreement on that now. I know our disagreement doesn't change the reality, but I also think if a God has that much power, it would be easier for us to discover what's objectively true. So I don't think
Unless
morality. I
unless we're
just
fallen.
right. If we're falling, then that's just part of the game. It could be part of the game is that hey, there is objective rules. You guys are banned from knowing it for reasons, and you can talk about it in heaven, but it just doesn't help us. So I always say if like I think it was Josh Rasmussen said, if like aliens could guarantee you that theism, some form of theism, was true, what kind of theism do you think would make sense of reality? And I said, well, it would either have to be like a bunch of gods with their own agenda, and this god wants this one, and this god wants something else, and they all just keep telling us different things, or it could be one god who's messing with us, but not one God that loves us and has the same message for all of us. The Christian God wouldn't make sense, but like a God like Loki would make sense, and or the Greek pantheon that would make sense, but not the Christian God. So in that case, I would say it's all kind of hit and miss. Whoever does better is the one who's going to get to talk about it, and I think that makes more sense for no gods.
Well, I don't want to go off on a long bunny trail here, but what do you think about the argument that I made in my book about that?
About
When
the
I
moral
said,
argument?
pardon me?
About the moral argument?
It's related to the moral argument, and it can be applied to the moral argument. It's a general argument that has lots of different applications. And the general argument is that if there is no God, we are nothing more than biological machines.
Right.
And we were not designed by any kind of intelligence.
Right.
We just simply popped into existence at random, out of nowhere, for no reason. And if that's the case, I agree with Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking said, if naturalism is true, then we're just biological machines and we have no free will. And the biological machines aspect of this is something that I have just laser focused on. And that is, if there's no God, we are machines. We're nothing more than machines. And we all have a pretty good idea of what a machine is. And so if we're all machines, then it would never occur to us to even ask questions about morality. Because we're machines. Machines don't talk about morality. Machines don't think about morality because machines don't think at all. And so therefore, they're not going to think about morality. Machines are never going to think, they're never going to look around the world and think, there's something wrong. There's something wrong here. This world,
Machines can't call themselves fallen.
Right. Yeah. A machine can't, and machines don't look around the world and say, look at all this suffering. Wow, there's something wrong with that. There's something wrong with that. If we were machines, we would never say anything like that. We would never say, it's that guy over there who attacked that young lady and she was defenseless and he attacked her and he beat her up and he took all her money. There's something wrong with that. We need to somehow try to stop that, or we need to somehow punish that guy. And we need to try to make it so that he can't do it again. So we're going to throw him in prison so he can't go out there and do that again. Machines aren't going to come up with anything like that. And so that's pretty much, that's how I would argue if I was doing a debate with you on the origin of morality. And it all has to do with whether or not, it's just the fact that we're even talking about morality points to something beyond ourselves that had to be the origin and source of that morality, because if we're the source of it, that doesn't make any sense. We would never come up with morality if we were just machines.
And this will give you a sneak peek for anyone who's watching and you want to know what I'm going to tell Eric, to give you a sneak peek for that. The way I approach what you just said is that I imagine organisms, before you even get to humans, I imagine organisms that they have to solve problems, and if you're going to solve problems, then you have to have some form of free will, even if those choices are fueled by chemicals. So let's start with a rat. And by the way, I think free will and morality are linked. I think they're the same thing. It's just morality is just a couple of steps up from free will. But like if you picture a rat in a maze, he can go left or he can go right. When he looks left, neuroscientists will tell you that when he looks left, there's a little dopamine algorithm in his mind going haywire, thinking this is what's going to happen if we go left. And he looks right, there's a dopamine algorithm that's like, this is what can happen, it's going to go right. And those dopamine algorithms will affect his choice. But then what happens is if they change what happens when he goes right, that might affect it next time, and he might go left. And if they change what happens when he goes left, that changes the dopamine algorithm. So there's something like analysis going on, and maybe it's determined by chemicals, but your experiences then changes that analysis the next time you're in that situation. So there is a feedback loop between the chemicals telling you to go this way, then reality happens to you, and it changes what you do next time. And then maybe next time you go that way, maybe you back up, maybe you jump up in the air, or maybe you just avoid the maze. So there's something like free will going on because we have feedback that affects the chemicals that tell us whether to go left or go right. What I think morality is an extra chemical that says we're not talking about this. You're going left because you've got to go left. This absolutely has to happen. And so then you don't even think about it. You're like, yeah, I'm going left. I'm the kind of rat that goes left. I think that's morality. I think morality is extra free will, extra chemical dose of free will that biology created to say, in some situations you can't sit and talk about it. In some situations you just got to do it. And I think that's what we experience now. There's certain situations, like you say, you and me see a guy robbing someone, and we just stop what we're doing. Say I'm carrying something, say you're babysitting, and we both know that if we drop what we're doing, that could be bad, but we're not going to think about it. We're like, we got to stop this guy from, you'll carry the baby, I'll set it down real quick, and we'll both run over. And, let's say the guy's really big, but between the two of us, we think we can take him. And we don't even know each other. We're just like, we just can't have this. So I think morality is that extra dose, and I think it is part of free will, but it's more certainty. It's more propulsion to actually get you to do it. That's how I see that.
Well, I have a billion and a half things to say about that, but I've been writing all this down, and I'm going to send it to Eric, and I'm going to tell him, hey Eric, here's what he's going to argue. So I'm going to rig the debate here a little bit. I'm going to warn him. Please. And give him that information ahead of time. Are you guys going to do that? Are you going to discuss it ahead of time, or are you going to say here's what I'm going to argue? And
we are sending each other. We are sending our opening salvo to each other. But
good.
But more than that, we've spent 3 years on this very topic. But Texas is a big state, and we've done maybe a dozen conferences together already. So imagine us at one end of Texas driving to the other end of Texas for hours arguing on this thing. So we know each other's positions left and right. It's going to be a great debate because we're very familiar with this.
So you're going to make that scrap public then?
Yes, we are.
It's about time.
Yeah.
After 3 years, that's great. Well, I would what I would do if I was in that debate, I would narrow in on one primary thing, but I would also narrow in on a secondary thing. The primary thing that I would work on would be, you talk about every creature has to solve problems.
Yeah.
And what I would focus on is the term problem. Where did that creature get the idea that something is a problem?
Right.
To be solved.
Yep.
And so what I like to do, and I have a great friend, his name is Carl. Carl and I talk about a lot of philosophical and theological things.
Yeah.
And I always say, Carl, let's go deeper. Let's go deeper. Let's go deeper. And I always try to get down to the fundamentals, and I always try to go back behind the scenes, and I want to examine the term problem.
Yep.
Because I don't want to leave a term like that just hanging out there in space. And so I would really press back on that if I was in that debate, and I would say, where did you get the idea that people, but also even animals, are capable of identifying something as a problem?
Not only that,
because
cells do this. So cells problem solve. Now you're really talking. Why do cells think that they're problems?
Yeah. So, but the other thing that I would focus on, and this is even more basic, and that is that this whole narrative assumes that creatures can comprehend something. Creatures can have thoughts that are about something.
Yeah.
And if we are simply machines, then there's no way that we can have thoughts that are about things. All we can have is data in our heads, because all a machine can store is data. That's all a machine does, is it stores and retrieves data, and then it goes through a bunch of electrical computations that work with that data and produce some kind of an outcome based on the data that was given to it.
Right.
When a machine stores data, it doesn't. There's nothing. There's no aboutness, and I'm spelling that ABOUTNESS. There's no such thing as about. There's no such thing as this data. The machine doesn't know what this data is about. The machine doesn't know what this data means. You can pour into a machine a bunch of statistics about people who died in the latest earthquake, and that would be a number, and it would have a label on it that doesn't mean anything to the machine. It's just a label. It's just ones and zeros. And the machine has no concept, no idea what that data is about. It doesn't know that it's about people who died and about people who had families and about the fact that there are families who are suffering now. Families are grieving the loss of their loved ones. The machine can't comprehend that, so there's no such thing as data that's about something for a machine. That's one thing that I would probably bring up, and maybe I'll text Eric and tell him, hey, say this when you talk to her. But I know you're familiar with that line of reasoning already. So let me do this. Let me fine tune the subject of today's discussion a little bit.
Okay.
Because I said, what has the greater explanatory power, atheism or theism? And so let me add a few terms to that.
Okay.
Let's say, what has the greater objective explanatory power, atheism or theism? Because your comment was, it depends on who you ask. You can ask somebody across the world in another culture what has explanatory power, and what's explanatory explanatory power to them is going to be different than what it might be for somebody who lives in Texas. And so you yourself brought up the idea of objective explanatory power. So I would narrow it down, and I would just limit it to what has objective explanatory power, not what has the kind of explanatory power that would be able to convince somebody. That's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about just explanatory power objectively, that's simply based on logical reasoning, and logical reasoning is not subjective. That's something that is objective.
This is where we might argue there too, whether that's true or not as well. But we'll get into that.
Whether logic is objective.
Right. I think there's some logical things that are objectively true, but I think the way people use logic can lead to different conclusions. That I think people can have different logical assumptions that will lead to different conclusions, even though 2 + 2 is 4, no matter what. But and you'll easily get agreement on that. But I just think that the way people use logic, you'll meet an Islamic scholar who also says the reason why he's a Muslim is because of logic. Somewhere in there, his logic is different than the Christian's logic.
Well, but the fact that we can examine his logic from an objective level means that we can identify whether or not there is an error in that logic, and if there's no such thing as a logical error, then logic would not be objective at all. There would be zero objectivity in logic. And if we affirm that there's some objectivity in logic, then we can stick to what's objectively logical, and then we can evaluate someone's logic based on what's objectively logical, and we can throw away what might be subjective because that's not useful. What do you think about that?
Well, okay, yeah, there's a whole.
Because I could be wrong.
Yeah, there's a bunch of things to get into. The first thing I want to say about, in terms of objective explanatory things, is that let's say that there is such a thing as objective explanations. And again, I always like to bring in aliens. Like, there's these aliens who come from a different dimension, and they know whether God exists, and they know whether there's objective reality or not, and they can prove it. But they don't want to prove it to us. They just want to watch us argue. But they know the answer because there is an answer. But so you don't have to convince them there's an answer because they know what it is and they know how to show it. But they don't want to show it to us. They just want to hear us argue. So those aliens are watching us, and they say, okay, there is such a thing as objective explanatory power. However, the Muslims are still going to think that they're doing it right, and the Christians are still going to think they're doing it right, and there's nothing we can do about it. There's no way to persuade them, even though there is objective explanatory power. It won't change anything, so it's hard to talk about it if it won't change anything.
Well, I can sympathize with that because it is very difficult to convince people who are intractably committed to various ideology,
Right.
But here's my here's the concern that I have about that, and that is that there's a big difference between whether or not something has objective explanatory power and whether or not it will convince somebody.
Right.
Because I have been mistaken about some things in the past. And so it's not always true that you can't convince somebody that their logic is faulty,
Right.
or that their explanations. Yeah. So, and I think both of us have been in that situation. I think people have pointed out things to you before where you were mistaken, and then you adjusted your thinking, and I adjusted my thinking when people pointed out, Phil, you're making a mistake. Here's where your mistake is. A lot of this other stuff that you're doing has a lot of validity, but you're making a mistake here and over here and then over there. And I was convinced by what can be putatively called an objective moral, or not moral, but an objective logical reasoning or logical argument. And so I have been convinced by objective. So whether or not it's objective and whether or not it is a powerful explanatory narrative, I would probably recommend staying away from whether or not it's going to convince anybody, and just stick to, does it successfully explain, and does it have a successful objective logical validity to it, and is it sound? Because something can be logically valid, but it could still be false.
Right.
And that's why we have so many different worldviews and so many different ideologies, because you can start with something that's false and apply logic to it, and you can come up with a false conclusion, but your logic could have been absolutely valid.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was getting at before. That same kind of thing. And one thing, because we're an hour into this, and I definitely had one theme that I wanted to push for this whole show, which is that most people are theists on this world, and even people who say they're atheists might believe that the universe is behind something, or that there's some love is in the air. You almost can't find anybody who doesn't think that there's something higher than them that matters to them, and that maybe there's something behind that, even if they don't call it deity. They could say human rights, or just the right to life, or something like that.
Yeah.
No matter what, not no matter what. Out of 8 billion people, you're going to be hard pressed to find someone who's like, no, there's nothing. They'll say there's something. Maybe it's not a deity, but it could just be an idea. So given that, it makes more sense to say that there's something, and you're probably going to have more people say there's something, there's some reason why things are like this, and it wasn't just an accident. Now, some atheists are going to say that it was, but it's going to be, for most people, it's going to be like there's something. And I remember being an atheist and saying, no, it's all an accident. Everything was whoops, and just being stuck on that. But you kept pushing me, and if you kept saying, come on, man, all this stuff, all these different things happen to be just this way, then maybe I would say, okay, yeah, it's weird. I don't get it. It does seem that way. I can see that all of that together. I can see how a lot of people would say there's some kind of something. So that was the main theme I wanted to get across for this show. As much as atheists might push back on this, I think a whole bunch of people would say, I at least understand why people think that.
Yeah. Well, there's your new moniker. There's something behind the something. I'm a somethingist. I'm a something there's something behind somethingist. What did you what was the phrase you just used?
Something behind something. But I'm not even saying that I believe that. I can just easily see why somebody would, and I can think of times in my life where I'm like, oh man, 3 of those things had to happen exactly that way. Are you telling me that was an accident? And for a while, I would say, no, it can't be an accident. And then maybe later, I'd be like, it could have been. It's just unlikely. But
Yeah.
so I
But
can't say that I'm that, but I can easily see why people would think that.
But at this point in your life, though, I don't think that. So tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't get the impression that you're convinced that there's nothing.
Right.
I think it seems to me that you're just not convinced that there's something. But I don't think that you're convinced that there's nothing either. Is that a good?
Right. I'm certainly not convinced that there's nothing. I'm definitely not. There's got to be nothing. I'm definitely not that. In fact, I'm reading a book right now. It's actually an essay. It won't be a book until next year. But the guy who's writing it is saying that the actual fabric of space-time has computation in it. So literally, the space-time fabric has computation within it. And he's an atheist. But he's like, this is something that you can measure with quantum waves, computation within the space-time fabric. And I'm like, okay, wow, why would it be that way? Why would this, whether it's a brute fact or not, why would there be computation in the space-time fabric? And I know people are going to challenge me on that. He's on Twitter, and his first name is Blaze, and I can send you the essay where he writes it.
Oh yeah, I know who that is. Yeah.
Yep. So I'll send you that. Blaze Aguera is his name. Blaze Aguera.
Mm-hmm.
I'll send that to you. But I mean, if there's computation in the space-time fabric, then I'm like, man, that's something. So I think I can easily see why people would think there's something, and where I might cross paths with Christians is that it could all go away. We could all get wiped out, and the universe will shrug, and it won't matter. We won't really matter. And that might be where I differ with Christians, because I see all this as temporary. I don't see this as eternal. I see it as temporary.
Well, yeah, we have that in common too, because we think that this present world in its present form is temporary, and that there's going to be something else that's going to replace it. But
for me, there won't be.
Yeah, right. But here's something that I find fascinating, and I find it's also something that I find refreshing, Richard, and that is that most of the atheists, and they can be represented by Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah.
And maybe I shouldn't say most of the atheists. Maybe I should just say a lot of atheists, because I don't know what the proportions are.
There's a lot online who like Christopher Hitchens.
Who what?
There's a lot of them online who like Christopher Hitchens. They say that Christopher Hitchens had it figured out.
Yeah, and Christopher Hitchens will look at a Christian or a theist, and they're going to say, "You're out of your mind."
Yeah.
But your message is not, "Hey, all you Christians, you're out of your mind." Your message is, "I can understand why you believe that," and to me, I find that remarkable, that someone who is a non-believer can say, I can understand why you believe that, why you do believe that, and there may be something to it. And I mean, Richard, that's almost as bad as me saying I could be wrong about a few things.
Wow.
You're probably going to lose some subscribers just by saying that. Maybe we should edit this out, but I appreciate that, because see, that's going to be a whole lot more productive. We're going to kick the can a whole lot farther down the road by saying, I can understand why you believe what you believe. Right. And I can say that to an atheist or a non-believer. I can say, I can understand why you don't believe. I can understand why you struggle with this concept of divine hiddenness. Why doesn't God just show up? And I'm sympathetic to atheists when they say that. Now, I do have some specific substance in reply to the divine hiddenness problem, but I'm still sympathetic toward it. When I spoke at this church a couple nights ago, somebody brought up a reason why they believed in open theism, and my reply to them was, that, I think, is one of the best arguments for open theism, and that is what makes me humble about open theism. Because you have a good point, and I can understand why you hold to it just because of that reason, if not other things as well.
I've heard
So
that too. I used to think I couldn't understand why open theists believed it, and this guy, another apologist who follows that, says the way he described it was really quickly. The future doesn't exist yet, and if the future doesn't exist,
that's
then how
exactly what the guy said.
yeah,
That's
and
yeah.
I'm like, yeah, it's like you telling me God can't create a square or circle. God can't see the future because there is no future yet. And so I was like,
Right.
oh, that makes sense.
Yep.
I,
And
I
that's
think it leads to a lot of problems because if God doesn't know the future, then God did not love me 55 years ago because I turned 54 today. So 55 years ago, God was like, I have no idea who you're talking about. And that
Yeah.
doesn't make sense to me, even though I don't believe in God. The kind of God I was raised in 55 years ago would be like, hey, in 55 years, Richard's going to be talking to Phil about this cool thing, and tune in.
So if you become a theist again, which
Yeah.
I'm hoping and praying that you do because I love you so much,
Yeah.
if you become a theist again, my guess is then you would not be an open theist. Is
Right.
that the
Right. I would think that he knew somehow, and yet at the same time, and I would be like, I don't know how I'm making sense of this, but he knew, but at the same time, I also am responsible for my actions.
well? That was the exact argument that this guy was presenting to me when I told him that he had a good point, and when I told him that that's what makes me humble about open theism, how I could be wrong about open theism. That was the exact thing. So it's funny that you brought that up because he talked about the future, whether the future exists or not. So the first way that I wanted to narrow the discussion down was objective explanatory power as opposed to just mere explanatory power, because that could be subjective. So objective explanatory power. And then the other thing that we could do to fine tune this to make this more productive would be, what is it that we're trying to explain? Does it have better explanatory power when it is trying to explain X? And my favorite phenomenon that I think we're productive in having a conversation about explanatory power is the phenomenon of intelligence. And so one way that we could frame this and one way that we could apply this discussion would be, which worldview is better? Gesundheit, bless you.
That was my wife.
Bless you, my wife. I mean, your wife. Which worldview better explains the existence of intelligence in an objective fashion, atheism or theism? So I think that's a far more focused question, and that would probably be more productive, and that's what I would like to actually start with. And if that's all that we talked about was the existence of intelligence, then I wouldn't be disappointed, because to me that is one of the most severe problems with atheism or agnosticism. That is, if there's no God, how do you explain intelligence? And here's one of my, and I want to find out what you think about this. I want to get your perspective on this. I have always said, and this is kind of one of my slogans, I guess, I've always said that intelligence will always be a better explanation than non-intelligence for just about anything. Intelligence will always be a better explanation for the survival imperative. Intelligence will always be a better explanation for the fact that we have self-replicating and self-diagnosis and self-repair in the DNA molecule. So I've always thought that intelligence is a better explanation for most things than non-intelligence is, but especially intelligence is a better explanation for intelligence than non-intelligence being an explanation for intelligence.
Right.
So give me your perspective on that.
Man, there's so many ways to take this. In terms of,
Right.
really quickly, when it comes between theism and atheism as better explanations, for me, theism is so much easier to say theism is the winner when you talk about anything at all existing. Just existence or not existence. I can easily see why so many people would say something or theism. So for me, that's the easiest one, is existence. When you get to intelligence, I get a little bit of a problem, and I might go away from theism a little bit more. but here's a bias. My bias is that theism means there is a message out there available for all of us, and intelligence is like getting closer to what that true message is. And I don't think that there is. I think that there's nothing out there watching us or caring about us. So then I think of intelligence as like a struggle, but the only payoff is that you get to still be here, rather than something being pleased with you figuring it out. It's more like if you're good at it, then you're going to still be here, and if you're not good at it, then you won't. So it's more like existence or non-existence, and that takes me closer to atheism when you actually get to intelligence. But then again, the fact that there's anything at all trying to solve problems, again, you're back towards theism. So I can say the existence of anything closer to theism. Intelligence itself, for me, closer to not theism, because and that's because of my bias. Again, for my bias, I'm thinking theism would mean that there's a goal, like a message that's above existence, and that doesn't make sense to me. I think it's existence or not existence.
That's I find that fascinating.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating that existence pushes you, or I don't know if that's the right term or not, but pushes you toward theism and makes you more sympathetic toward theism, but intelligence makes you more sympathetic toward non-theism,
Atheism.
like toward atheism. So I that surprises me. I never would have guessed that you would say that. And that's because I don't have knowledge of the future. But
Well, it's also because I'm biased. Because whenever I think about theism, I am thinking about somebody who knows and who's watching it the same way I like watch a pet or something, or something.
yeah,
If I made a bunch of stuff and I'm watching them and I want them to do well, I think about that automatically, because that's the kind of God I was raised on. He's up in the sky, he's watching. It's like, come on, man, you got this. That always comes creeping back whenever I think about theism, and it might not be like that. It could be a God that can make universes and then just doesn't care. I've made this universe, and oh, are they suffering? I'm sorry, I'm busy. I'm making other universes. It could be like that.
yeah. Let me throw this against the wall and see if it sticks with you. You said that there's some message out there, and that intelligence is getting closer to the message.
That's how I would imagine it with theism. Yeah. Okay. I'll put money in your account. It's my birthday, and yet I'm putting money in my daughter's account.
No, it's okay.
Oh, okay. All right. Bye.
Hi, daughter. I have two daughters too, so we have a kinsmanship there.
Yes. Go ahead.
So here's instead of saying I want to see what you do with this. I just want to sit back and just observe what you do with this.
Uh-huh.
What if we didn't talk about a message?
Okay.
What if we talked about an intelligence itself as intelligence? In other words, if is there a message out there, and is there some, and is intelligence designed, or is the purpose of intelligence to try to find out what that message is? And your bias is that there is no message, and that a bunch of intelligent creatures are simply trying to find something that doesn't exist.
Right.
What if we changed the formula to say there are intelligent creatures out there who are trying to try to discover the source of their intelligence, and to discover whether or not there is an intelligence that is at the back of all of this. There's an intelligence that was responsible for producing all these beings that have intelligence as well, and that kind of raises the creepy notion of it. It seems a little bit like a plot, because there's an intelligence that started all of this, and he put intelligence in us, and I wonder if that means that he wants to talk to us. So
I see that.
but I don't want to necessarily press you in that direction, but I would like to know what you would do with that instead. So replace the message with intelligence itself.
Yeah. I guess for me, it would still just go back to the fact that anything at all is doing anything at all, and I can see why theism would make sense there. It's just when I think about what intelligence means, It might be William James who first said that intelligence is the ability to reach the same goal through multiple avenues. Um, so then I think um, if evolution created problem-solving organisms to be able to reach the same goal through multiple avenues. So, in other words, they have a goal, and they have a way to get to that goal, and then you block that goal. Intelligent creatures can get around that goal, or go over it, or get rid of the obstacle. They're not going to stop until they get to the goal. And for me, that's what I think of as intelligence. Um, and
And and where did they get that goal in the first place?
well, and this is why I think morality and free will and a gentle agency is all related. Is that if you don't have goals and if you can't problem solve, then you're not going to compete as well as others. But now, why did that ever exist? Uh, in fact, there's something you said that reminded me of this, and I want to make sure your audience knows. There's a scientist named Kevin Mitchell and another scientist named Robert Sapolsky, and they're going to argue over free will. They're going to be on a debate here. So if you look up Robert Sapolsky, Kevin Mitchell, you'll see the videos coming up next week. And
Well,
they actually,
I've already. Let me interrupt real quickly. I've already done that, and I'm quoting Robert Sapolsky in my machine in the new edition of Machines Don't Laugh. By the way. Anyway, I didn't mean to, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
well, and they debated last year. The reason why this is so cool is because they went through this last year, and now they're going to do a part two this year because they've had time to really think about each other's answers. But the cool thing about this is that they're both atheists, and Sapolsky is like, "There's no free will," and Kevin Mitchell is like, "Oh, there is free will," and they're two atheist neuroscientists, so they're looking at the same data. But the thing is, they're looking at it differently. Sapolsky's looking at it from the terms of all the things that affect our minds before we make a decision, and he's right. When he lists all the things that affect our minds, it's hard to imagine where we have free will. But Kevin Mitchell is looking at it from starting with the first organisms that had agency, and why did they go from just existing to being able to go left or go right or go forward or just sit still? And he said the reason that happened was because they had mechanisms for like going towards the light or running away from the light. That was their first choice. And then their second choice was there's food over here or there's danger over here. So now you have three choices: towards the light, away from the light, towards the food, away from the food, away from the danger, or towards the danger. And so the best organisms were the ones that could make the best choices among those three things. And that's how you've got intelligence and agency and problem solving was dealing with those three pressures. And then he said that from there, it's just more and more complicated and more neurology needed to do that. And he said that's why we do have free will. So I say all that to say this. The fact that we can do it makes me think, oh my gosh, there's got to be some sort of a theism. My immediate intuitive thing is like just anything at all makes me think theism. But then all the things that could go wrong and the things that are struggling and they just evaporate and nobody hears the story, that makes me think that maybe atheism is true. So I'm kind of torn on that.
Yeah. Well, my friend Bill Cluck is having a crisis of faith in atheism.
I know him, and I know that story.
And we talked about it the last time that we had their session. And I was hoping that you could be there because I think that it would have been meaningful for you to.
Yeah, I meant to be there because I knew Godless Granny was going to be there, and I wanted to counteract her push. But I had to work. I couldn't get out of it.
Well, she was there, and this was the time when she made the comment that sparked this discussion, that sparked this podcast. Yeah. So that was the same discussion, and Bill is coping, and I think it would be okay with him to talk about him like this.
Because I was going to bring this up to you because I wanted to talk to Bill on that show. Maybe he'll come on your show, and the two of us can talk.
Well, I've invited him to come on my show, and I would love for the three of us to talk. Yep. But I shared something with him about the fact that the DNA molecule is self-replicating and has self-diagnosis and self-repair mechanisms built into it, and how it would be impossible for chance to produce that kind of intelligence and so on. But I wanted to celebrate the fact that he is willing to look at the data in a fresh way, and that he's simply not going to settle for being closed-minded on this. He doesn't want to settle for everything being settled.
Yep.
And I like that about Bill. And so when he looks at the fine-tuning argument, that's the thing that's sticking in his craw the most right now.
That's how it is with a lot of atheists, fine-tuning.
That's the thing that is messing him up as far as his atheist is concerned. So it's really messing with his head. And I like that. I mean, I'm glad for that. And this is not, I'm not glad in a condescending way. I'm glad in a way that says, I'm proud of you, Bill, for the same reasons that I'm proud of you, Richard, because you're willing to consider these things, and you're willing to say something like, I can understand why you would believe this, because it makes a certain amount of sense. And so for you, it seems like this explanatory power, I think, is a factor for you. That's the impression that I get. And that's one reason why I wanted to talk to you about it. It's not to put you on the spot. It's just so that I could hear from you, because one of the things that I want to do in my life is I want to understand the mind of the non-believer. I want to understand what makes the non-believer tick. And then I want to love the non-believer based on that understanding, because I think if I understand the non-believer better, I think I can love the non-believer better. Yeah. And if I love the non-believer better, I might be able to have an influence on perhaps whether or not they want to return to their faith. But even if they don't, I'm not going to criticize them, and I'm not going to think anything less of them, because I already admire them so much, just because of the fact that they're struggling with these issues. And it's just not settled the way it was for Christopher Hitchens. Right. Everything was settled for Hitchens. Everything. Yep. And so I have a whole lot more respect for you. I have a whole lot more respect for Bill. I have a whole lot more respect for Richard Dawkins, who just came out recently and said that he thought Christianity was good for society. So that tells me that that things aren't settled for him either, necessarily. Right. He talks like they are, but I'm not sure they are when he makes a comment like that. And so it makes me, and here's the big rub for me about explanatory power. And I'm going to lose subscribers over this as well, but I don't care. If I'm going to lose a subscriber over this, then that's a subscriber that I don't want anyway. Because I don't want somebody hanging on me as though I'm some kind of authority. But it makes me want to look at myself and say, Phil, how settled are things for you? And I have to admit, they are very settled. After being a Christian for 50 years, a whole lot of things are pretty much settled for me. My faith is settled. I don't think that I'm ever going to abandon my faith. I think Christianity is true. And so there are certain things that are settled, but I always want to make the statement, because I had a conversation with someone who is kind of a far removed family member in the last few years, and I told them the same thing that Francis Schaeffer said in one of his books. He said, if you show me the bones of Jesus Christ, I'll be the first one to get out of the line. I'll be the first one to leave my church. I'll be the first one to abandon my faith. And so I want you to tell me whether you think that's a healthy thing for me personally, just as a friend, because if everything was settled for you and for Bill, then I would be disappointed. Right. But then I have to ask myself, is everything settled for me? And should you be disappointed in me, Richard, for everything being settled, or for so many things being settled? And one of the ways that I think that I can cope with that, and one of the ways that I think that maybe I can address that, is to acknowledge that if you give me evidence that conclusively demonstrates that Christianity is false, I will abandon my faith. And I think that my commitment to intellectual integrity like that, I think that that kind of serves as a counterpart to the intellectual integrity that you have, that Bill has, that I think Kelly has, because I don't know how subtle things are for Kelly. But whenever I hear her talk, I think to myself, this is someone who has intellectual integrity. This is someone who really wants to know. This is someone who is asking sincere questions. And so sometimes I think that you guys have more intellectual integrity than I do, because things are so unsettled, and they're so settled for me. Maybe that means that I don't have as much integrity as I should. But on the other hand, I'm convinced of Christianity for reasons, not just for no reason. And so I do have a bias, and I think my bias is justified. But I also want to, at the same time, say that I could be deceived, and if I am, and you can prove it, if you can give me absolute conclusive evidence that my Christianity is false, then I am willing to take my licks, and I'm willing to walk out of the church at that point.
Hey, real quick, I've got a few things I wanted to say, but I want to just ask you real quick. What if right now tonight I showed you something, and you're like, oh my gosh, Christianity wasn't true, and you changed overnight. So tomorrow morning you wake up, you're not a Christian. Would you live your life any differently? Would you like go rob a bank, or would you just keep taking care of your family and keep working hard? And what would you do? What would your life change?
That's a good question. First of all, it wouldn't be sudden like that, because this has been a long process for Bill, and I don't think it would be a sudden overnight process for me, because if you showed me that proof,
Yeah.
then, and I examined it, I don't think I would abandon my faith overnight. I think I would verify it. I would work on it. I would study it. I would do a lot of work. And that would be, for me to abandon my faith would be a process. It's not something that would happen overnight.
It was for me like
But but the most important part of your question is, would I live my life any differently? And I think I would live my life differently in some ways, and I might not live my life differently in other ways. But I do know that I would have a real hard time. I would struggle hard with, why should I live my life like this? Why should I live my life in a self-sacrificial way? Why should I sacrificially love my wife? If there's no God, there's nothing. There's no grounds to morality. I think I would probably entertain those things. But I love her so much that I wouldn't abandon her, and I wouldn't be unfaithful to her. But I would sit down and wonder why I'm being unfaithful to her. And the fact that I love her so much would probably push me back into theism, because I can't explain love on the basis of naturalism. I don't think love exists under naturalism. And you have to have quite a powerful skyhook to get you out of that conundrum. And I don't think a skyhook like that exists. But even if it is, it would be a skyhook. It wouldn't be anything solid. It wouldn't be anything that was based on some kind of intellectual foundation. So I think I would do both. I think there are some things that I might do differently, and then there are probably a lot of things that I would do the same.
I think the same thing for me would be true for me. I got to was it last year or 2 years ago? I went to go see Bill Dembski give a lecture at a school in Texas, and I got to hang out with him for a while, and we all had dinner, and he talked to me for a long time, and he learned about my life and how I live. I wake up in the morning, take care of my kids, take care of my family, work hard, think about my community, spend a lot of time at churches, and the way I just live my life. He's like, it's funny, if I saved you tonight and you went back home, your life wouldn't really change, and you would still get up in the morning, take care of your family. You still think it was important. He's like, I meet a lot of atheists who are like, on drugs and lost and angry and all that sort of stuff. And I'm thinking I should save them because I want them to not be like that. But you're living a very healthy, productive life, and you're not that I'm great, but I am struggling to be that way. And he's like, yeah, it's funny. Your life wouldn't be much different. You'd still be going to church. You'd still be doing podcasts with Christians.
Well, let me ask you that question, but let's ask that question in reverse. Let's ask it from the past.
Yeah.
Instead of from what would you do in the future. Let me ask that question. What did you do differently in the past? Because you used to be a Christian, you abandoned your faith, you became an atheist or whatever you want to call yourself. And what did you live your life differently after that point, or did you live your life pretty much the same? Was anything different?
Well, that's funny because I was born and raised Christian. I was born and raised Southern Baptist, but as a teenager, we noticed in my youth group, we noticed that all the adults were talking bad about two things: alcohol and hooking up, that they were still doing. So they were like, don't you do this? This is a sin. This is awful. But then we knew them and we're like, yeah. And then they go home and they do it. So we did that. So as Christians in our youth group, drinking and sneaking off somewhere, especially on ski trips, that was the thing. And so when I stopped becoming a Christian, then I was still drinking and I was still sneaking off. So I didn't really change much. I just stopped thinking that God existed. So my life didn't really much change going from Christianity to atheism, because you could say I wasn't following those two rules anyway, even when I believed that God was watching, because I was like, if he's watching, it's not affecting the adults who are in my church, so I don't know why it's going to affect me. Plus, it's under certain circumstances. Obviously, you can't run around and drink whatever and jump into whatever. There's got to be some standards there. But if you get to a point where you're healthy about that sort of stuff, it's enjoyable, even as a Christian. And then, so when I lost my faith, I still just kept doing that. I would say my life was trial and error. There got to be a point where I'm like, there's too much of this, and I don't know for what. I don't know, because I'm actually very diplomatic. It's hard to make an enemy out of me. So even people who later we're like, why did we decide that we wanted to do that? There were, what's the big payoff? We weren't ever going to be together forever. Do we really miss anything if we had just never done that? And then I carried that forward so I could meet people who were attractive and say, rather than thinking something has to happen here, I could just enjoy them as a person without thinking that something more has to happen. Same thing with alcohol. I can have a whiskey sour and then let it go at that and drink water and go to the gym the next day. So it was more like trial and error than it was God versus not God, or accountability. It was more like just trial and error. Yeah. So I didn't really change going from Christian to atheism, except just to think that somebody wasn't watching. And then all of my vices that I had, I learned just because I'm like, okay, I like this, but too much of this is bad, so I'm going to be a little bit more controlled. Then I'm going to be a little bit more controlled. And then I'm like, I'm just actually going to be very disciplined on this, and I think that's better. And so it was more trial and error than it was thinking that God was watching. So maybe you could say it was selfish. It was selfishness, but more intellectual selfishness. To just not do that because there's not the payoff that you think it is.
Well, our topic is explanatory power tonight, and I would have to say that if I stopped being a Christian but my life didn't change very much. I still loved my wife. I still took care of my household, and I still worked hard, still wanted to be honest, wanted to live an upright life, and wanted to have integrity. The fact that I would still desire to do those things, it itself has explanatory power.
Right. I wonder if everything is a selfishness.
But I would sit there, but it can't be, because there are a lot of things that I do for my wife that I wish I didn't have to do. There are times when I have to go out and feed horses, and sometimes I'm not in the mood to feed horses, but she might be sick, and so I'm taking care of her, and so there are a lot of things that I do that I don't think you can call selfish, unless you want to say, well, they're going to lead to good outcomes for you, and so on.
Or just I
But
enjoy it. Like for me, there's times where I do things where there's no payoff, but I just like that. Like I like the idea that what I did helped move them forward, even though there's no payoff or they don't even know that I was involved. I still enjoy that sensation. So you can still say there's some selfishness going on there.
yeah, but I do things though that I don't want to do, but I do them because they're the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I don't consider that selfishness. I consider it selfish if I don't do those things because I don't want to do them, even though they're the right thing to do.
Right.
Because I've seen myself do that. And again, if I stopped being a Christian, but I kept doing those things, that would have explanatory power. And I would sit down there and I would wonder why I'm doing those things. If I abandon my belief in God, then why am I doing all these things that I don't want to do when I would rather be doing something else, something fun, but I'm doing them because I think they're the right thing to do? Why am I still doing them? Why do I even think they're the right thing to do if there's no God? And if I've abandoned my whole faith and abandoned my belief in God. If I abandon my belief in God, I'm going to abandon my belief in a whole lot of other things as well. I'm going to abandon my belief in objective morality. And I'm going to abandon my belief that I should do things and that I should care about things. I'm going to abandon my belief that I should care.
You won't stop running. You won't rob a bank, though.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Interesting.
I couldn't guarantee it. I can't guarantee what I would and would not do if I stopped being a Christian. I don't think I can predict that.
Okay.
But what I can predict is that if I kept doing some things that I was doing before because I thought they were the right thing to do, I would sit down and wonder why. I can absolutely predict that.
Yeah, I do that.
And
I do that. Like, why did I do something for someone else? But it's just I've been doing it like that for so many years now that I think, you know what? I enjoy it. I enjoy that because of something I did, this other person was able to move forward, even if they don't like me or know about me or ever know about me. I just enjoy that feeling.
yeah, and if it was me, I would sit down and say, why is it if there's no God and I wasn't created by an intelligent moral being, then why do I enjoy doing something that benefits somebody else? That would have no explanation for me whatsoever if that was the case.
And I've had these conversations with Christians before too. I'm like, the funny thing is that if there was an earthquake, we would both stop what we're doing. We'd go and help those other people. And then you would say, well, it's because God. And that's why you're doing it too. You just don't realize it. And I would say, well, I just can't fathom someone suffering if I can't help. But okay. And I'll say, actually, you actually are doing the same thing, but you're just coming up with God to make it make sense to you. But at the same time, someone is like, okay, now help us move this brick. Okay, yeah. And we're all, there's no way to lift the brick. And if you and I don't jump in there, that brick's not going to come up. So we both go in and we both lift the brick. And I'm just saying, as long as the brick gets lifted, then who cares? You say it's for God. I say it's because I enjoy the feeling and whatever. The brick's lifted.
That's why I call you the quintessential pragmatist.
Yeah, I try to be.
Because whenever I think of Richard Suttles, I don't think of someone who I think of someone who cares more about pragmatism than about explanations and about understanding reality.
That's good. I'm going to make that into a TikTok clip. I like that.
Yeah. Yep. And you could come under some criticism for that.
I'm okay with it.
Because somebody's going to say, well, yeah, I mean, all Richard cares about is pragmatism, but that doesn't answer the fundamental questions, and not only that doesn't answer what his ultimate destiny is going to be, and he ought to be thinking about that as much as he is thinking about pragmatism and helping his neighbor, because we're all glad that you do that. There are a lot of atheists that won't do that. I mean, how many people have been murdered in the 20th century because of atheism? And some people will say, well, just as many people were murdered in the name of religion than in the name of atheism. And I would say, no, there's not an even parity between the two. There's a whole lot more people have been murdered in the name of atheism than have been murdered in the name of Christianity or the name of religion. And we would say that the people who murder for their religion are misguided, but we don't say that about atheists. We don't say that an atheist that murders somebody is being inconsistent with his worldview. We just don't say that because it's not.
Well, and then I would just say, just don't do it, and tell yourself the story that you want to
That's
tell
right.
yourself, but just don't be that way.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why I call you the ultimate pragmatist, and by the way, also the ultimate optimist, because I see you as having a lot of optimism and a positive outlook
Yeah,
on
that's right.
things. You don't look around the world and just simply curse the darkness and then just do nothing. I mean, your whole life's work is about not cursing the darkness, but doing something about it.
Right. I'm definitely biased there because I don't think we told your listeners that I work in counterterrorism and I have for 30 years. We didn't tell them this time anyway. But yeah, so 10, 12 hours a day, I'm looking at the worst of the worst, and so that might be why I'm this way, is to try and counter that.
Yeah. And you're looking at the worst and the worst, and you're not getting depressed. You're not losing hope. You're not living a life of despair.
Right.
You're just saying, let's do something constructive about this.
Yep.
Because I think you do think that it is objectively wrong. Otherwise, you wouldn't try to do something about it.
And this might be where Sam Harris comes into the conversation. He might say, if we're all terrorists, then we won't still be here. There's got to be some people who try to be diplomatic and work together, or we wouldn't even be here to have the conversation.
And the theist would say, and what's wrong with that?
Well, that's fine as long as we're here.
What's wrong with us not being here?
That goes back to explanatory power versus pragmatism.
Right.
Because you might have a point there, but we wouldn't even be able to ponder it if we weren't here. So
that's right.
Everybody wins. We're still here, and we can ponder it.
Right. Well, and that's why I wanted to have the conversation about objective explanatory power with the pragmatist.
That's a good point.
Because I want to stretch you, but I also value your input far more than I do someone who is just absolutely entrenched in this ideology and thinks they have all the answers, because that's not you, and that's why it's a productive. I'm simply repeating myself now. That's what I said earlier in the broadcast. That's why this is a productive conversations, because it's just not settled, and I think that you could be convinced that God exists, and just like I have to say that I could be convinced that he doesn't, because I have to be honest and I have to be humble. I have to have a willingness to examine the evidence, no matter what it is. I always have to be willing to examine the evidence. And so the fact that I think you could be convinced that God exists, or that you should be a believer, however you want to frame that. But if I'm going to say that, if I'm going to say, hey, Richard, I celebrate the fact that you would be convinced by something that has greater explanatory power and that you're sensitive to that issue. I think that if I say that, I have to be willing to say, and I could be convinced otherwise as well, on a lot of things that I believe, and possibly even on my theism. I just don't think that's going to happen. But I have to admit that I'm not perfect, and that I am, so I have to take the same posture, because if I don't, I'm being hypocritical. Does that make sense to you? I mean,
It does. If I try to judge somebody, and I can't help judging people, then I say, okay, now what would I do if I judge myself on that? I do definitely try that.
Yeah.
I'm not good at it, but I try.
For being a non-believer, you follow Jesus' advice pretty well.
Right, and I've always said
He said, "Don't judge if you don't want to be judged by the same criteria."
Right, I think there's a lot of good wisdom in the Bible, and the thing I would argue about is did that come from Christianity, or did that come from just wisdom of the ages and time, trial and error, and then the smart authors captured that in a good way in Scripture.
Yeah. Well, here's a little known fact about Christianity. Christianity did not invent morality.
Right. Yeah, it would have existed before Christianity. That's right.
Yeah, any Christian who says that Christianity or even Judaism,
Yeah.
if any Christian who thinks or Jew or Orthodox Jew who thinks that their religion invented morality, they've gone off the rails because it didn't.
It would have had to have existed as long as there have been people. There would have had to be a moral system.
Right. It's just that we have a good explanation for the fact that morality has always been around. So, yeah, I don't think Christianity invented morality, but I do think that it explains morality pretty well. And that gets back to our explanatory power. And so I don't think so here's my statement. Here's for the record, here's my verdict on this question. I think that theism explains reality better than atheism, but that's a very broad statement. And I think that theism objectively explains morality or explains reality better than atheism, better than the lack of an intelligence, better than the lack of a designer, and so on. And so that's not going to be come as any surprise to you.
No.
You're not going to be surprised that a Christian would say that God explains reality better than the lack of God.
Right, and I only wanted to come on here to say that I understand that. I understand why you guys would say that.
But I also wanted to say that it's not something that we simply take on faith as a brute fact, the way that some atheists do as far as the universe. That the universe is just in reality and existence is just a brute fact, and it doesn't need to be explained. I don't think there's an even parity there. And I'm talking mainly about attitudes when I say that. That atheists may take the universe and accept it as a brute fact and say it doesn't need to be explained. I think that is inconsistent with the atheist values, because atheists always value the scientific endeavor and they value explanations as opposed to non-explanations and taking things on faith. So that's why I think it's so problematic for an atheist to say, just assume the universe, assume existence, and don't try to explain it, just accept it as a brute reality. Because they, again, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, I would never get away with that if I said that about God. They would never let me get away. They would never let me get away with it.
Yep.
So I don't think there's this even parity. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off because I'm seeing a couple of yawns coming from the birthday boy here, and my guess is that you'd like to do something to celebrate your birthday and not just do a podcast all night long and waste it on this. So
we are going to go out. The kids have a couple things to do, and when they get back, we're going to go out tonight. So yeah, we are going to do that.
Okay.
I'll even take a nap.
Well, I will. I'll let you go so you can do that. And I hope I didn't interfere with your birthday celebration today.
No, this was good because I had to take the day off anyway for another reason, and I had a lot to do today for my birthday. So I got that done, and this was perfect timing to kind of serve as a bridge between that and going out tonight.
Well, I'm honored that I could be the one to interview you on your birthday. So that you gave me that time. You could have given it to a lot of other people, and so I'm honored that you did that, and I appreciate it. This has been a phenomenal conversation. I think that we always make progress, and every time I talk to you, every time I interview the Faithiest Atheist or the Fallen Atheist, whatever your preference is now, I always learn something. Every single time I learn something whenever I have these discussions with you. And so I appreciate that, and I'm grateful for that. And so I hope to have lots more of these kinds of discussions in the future. So
thank you. And I'm going to send the links, that scientist who said computation is part of reality, and the dates for or the big date for me and Eric having a debate. That'll be interesting for your listeners. Okay.
I think that I can go ahead and edit my description for this particular podcast in YouTube so that I can have those. I can put those in there. Okay. My fear is that it won't let me do that after it's already been recorded and posted. but I don't think that's the case. I think I can modify it afterwards.
And if not, it'll be in my comment. I'll make a comment as the fallen atheist with all of that.
Okay.
All right.
You want to make a comment now? I mean, in the side chat?
On the YouTube, underneath the video.
The YouTube comment session. Okay, yep.
Yeah. All right.
All right, cool. Yep. Okay. Thank you, Richard. It's been a privilege and it's been a pleasure as always. And happy birthday, and say hi to your family and enjoy your evening.
Thank you so much.
All right. Signing off. Yep.